Hello, everyone. My name's Bhante Akaliko. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm a cisgender, queer Buddhist monk. It's my pleasure today to welcome you all here to this special interview as part of the International Trans Day of Visibility. So Rainbodhi LGBTQIA Community is a spiritual friendship group for everyone who, regardless of gender, regardless of sexuality, regardless of race or ability. And our aim today is to make visible parts of the trans community within our Buddhist community that some people might not be aware of. So it's my pleasure today to welcome our special guest, Claire. And I'll just read a little bit about Claire. So Claire is travelling the Buddhist path and training for ordination in the Theravada Sangha. They live in Sydney, Australia, and they're inspired particularly by metta and the idea of community coming together in ways to support deep interconnectedness. Claire is full of gratitude for individuals and communities which supported them to find themselves through practicing as a non-gendered being. They're excited to be a part of Rainbodhi's crew and shared spaces which explore queer being in welcoming communities, inclusive spaces, and wants to make sure that everyone feels that they belong to go beyond, which is a very nice phrase. I might even steal that from you, Claire. So
I thought someone might. Yeah.
welcome, and thank you for being here today.
Oh, thank you. It's a great opportunity to be able to share.
And so can you tell me a little bit about yourself and how you identify?
Yeah. So I am a non-gendered being. And the way that feels for me is that gender doesn't really exist in my experience. It does. It exists in that other people assume gender of me.
Other people give you gender?
Yes, other people hand it to me in little packages.
Right,
Yeah. But within myself, it's not there. So it's very much an incongruous experience to be in a very gendered world, having no internal experience of gender.
Right.
And trying to be seen and understood when that's the world I live in. Yeah. So I think that's me. Yeah.
And I think it must be so tricky, difficult, perhaps, maybe even sometimes hostile, to be in a world that is so binary, where, you have to kind of grow up as a certain gender, be pushed into certain gender roles, having to make so many choices every day about which bathroom to use or which team to play with or all those sorts of things.
Yeah, it can be. I have to admit I'm quite privileged in a way, because I am easily read as female or as a woman. You can't see my whole body on this screen, but I'm quite curvaceous. So people read me as a particular gender very easily. And so I don't get a lot of hostility. And I get confusion, I suppose, when I start sharing with people.
Sure, yeah.
But so it can feel quite, I have to take the role of sharing my gender with people, sharing my non-gender with people. And it's kind of there's a challenging edge there when do I choose to do that and when do I not choose to do that. And it is a privileged position to be in one
and so
way.
it's a case of, instead of a gender being imposed upon you, you're inviting them in to see your true non-gendered experience.
Yeah.
But that's an invitation that you have to make.
It is an invitation that I have to make, and it can be challenging to have made that invitation and then have that not heard or not seen. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Because these kind of things for some people feel quite confusing.
Mm.
And we were talking just before about Trans Day of Visibility.
Mm.
Often non-binary or non-gendered people are put under the trans umbrella.
Mm.
It's kind of like called an umbrella identity. And I think we're starting to discover that the experience of trans people who want to become a particular gender or want to express their particular gender is quite a different experience to people who don't have a gender. And in some conversations we have with other members of our communities, it seems difficult for people to grasp that we call these people trans because they're moving across gender boundaries, but the experience that you have is quite different to someone who's transitioning through a gender.
Mm.
So how do you perceive kind of the way you've been, I guess, pigeonholed under the trans umbrella? And is there some sort of conversation that needs to happen with the trans and queer communities to sort this out?
Yeah, that's a very, very large question. And I can only really talk about my own experience within that, because there are so many different people expressing and experiencing their gender in so many different ways. And there are non-binary or genderqueer people who do fit and do feel that they fit within the trans umbrella. And I can't speak to their experience. But for me, I've kind of dabbled with the idea of being under the trans umbrella, and I can't quite, for myself, I can't quite see. I want to fit there, but I can't quite see how. Because and I know that people would invite me in. That would be not a problem, do you know?
Right. I think that was the thing with the umbrella. It was like, we just want to include everyone.
Yeah, yeah.
But then in a way, it's still making these kind of very neat boundaries that want to contain gender. It's like, look, we don't know where to push you, but you're going to have to fit in here. And if you're going to fit in here, this is how you're going to have to be. This is how it is.
Well, my hope is that that's not the case.
Right.
You know,
I think
my dream.
Sometimes, sorry.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to say, sometimes we're so uncomfortable with things not fitting in neat.
It's true.
boxes.
It's true.
Yeah.
Yeah. People do love a good label, and that's great. You know, and people need those as well. It's like we move through the world needing labels for everything that we do. We can't live without them, really. I mean, as Buddhists, we're trying to step beyond those labels and be without them, and try and experience what that would be to be without labels. It would be amazing. But we live in a relative world. It's like I was watching a presentation by a trans order member in the UK, so a trans ordained person within Theravada, and they were talking about the experience of the relative versus, you know, the beyond, and the experience of within this experience of the relative, this is my gender. This is how I need to express in the world in order to be and be myself as fully as possible. And I'm working to go beyond that. You know, I'm working to as a Buddhist, I'm working to be labelless. But I live in the relative. You know, and for me, that experience of those two things colliding, as someone who's non-gendered, it's kind of like I want to be over here in the non-relative. I want to be over here in the beyond, but I somehow have to work out how to live in the relative with no gender. And sometimes that plays out as feeling very uncomfortable. And sometimes that plays out as feeling very liberated. And any given day can be different. And that's part of the experience of being alive, I think. Everybody has that for various things. So.
I wonder, though, it seems to me, I'd love to talk about the experience of being a non-gendered being in Buddhist communities, because it seems that the kind of conversation that you've been perhaps having with yourself and maybe some others is not a conversation that a lot of Buddhists, especially cis Buddhists, would have. This idea of gender is something that perhaps they've never had to interrogate, struggle with, question.
And yet they're trying to go beyond labels.
And yet we're trying to go beyond labels. Yeah. So can we just take a step back and talk about how it is for you being a non-gendered Buddhist?
Well, I actually realized who I was because of Buddhism, because of my practice. So it's not that I was aware of my non-gendered being and then became a Buddhist. It was that I became a confused person becoming a Buddhist. And through practice came to understand what was happening. And I think that for me was quite a powerful way to learn and understand myself much more deeply. So just quick aside, I always knew I was queer. From a very young age. I knew I was queer, and I had that within the context of sexuality and was kind of working that through and making sense of that. But I would have conversations with other queer people who were just like, oh, everything kind of makes sense now. It's like I know who I am. And I never had that. I always just had this other confusion about me. And I was always kind of trying to work it out within the world of sexuality, because the world of gender had been presented to me as one thing. Well, two things. You know, male, female, off you go, make a choice. And, well, even don't make a choice, you just won.
Yeah, don't make a choice.
Put the dress on. So it was, I was on retreat and I had an experience of, I'd been on quite a long retreat, and I had an experience of being seated outside and my body melting into the landscape. So this physical form was exactly the same as all of the other forms around me. There was no difference. And that was kind of the seed of me kind of going, oh, actually, this thing that I call me is not connected. This body is not it. this body. So it kind of, I went through the route of deconstructing my connection with my body. And then through that, I was like, oh, and I was reading gendered stuff, you know, gender theory and all kinds of stuff at the same time. And so delved in a little bit deeper and thought, well, where is gender represented within me? And I went searching. You know, I went looking for this sense of gender and couldn't find it anywhere. It had just been a kind of sheet that had been laid over the top. And in realizing that, I went, oh, God, okay. I'm now training within an order that is quite gendered. There's a lot of Buddhist communities are gendered. They kind of have the male route and the female route. And the wonderful thing about Triratna is those are the same, but they are still separate. Yeah. So, you know, so it's like, yay, we have equally ordained women, but you get ordained within a women's kind of community. Nuance. You get ordained into the order, into the community, but the training is all within a female wing or within a male wing. And so I was like, oh, here I am. Training in this community that is quite gender segregated, and there's really good reasons for that have developed over time, and the recognition that gender is conditioned, and we need to work with that, and I think that that's an important thing. But then suddenly kind of being a non-gendered being within this context was really challenging. And I questioned whether it was the right context for me.
Yeah, and I think it's probably not an experience that's unique to you, but many genderqueer, non-binary, transitioning Buddhists and other members of the public who visit Buddhist centres, retreat centres, organisations, who are forced into this binary construct and have to make choices around things like accommodation, bathrooms, which side of the hall they sit on, and that these choices themselves are kind of, I don't want to use an extreme term, but they're kind of violent in a way. You know, they force people into something that they may not be comfortable with, and they don't recognise the real diversity of our community. And in your kind of coming to your own realizations, did you have any conversations with your community?
I did, and that's the thing that allowed me to stay. Because I went to the people I trusted and admired and said, look, this is happening. My experience is evolving and changing and becoming something completely new to me and completely incongruous with the community I'm in. Well, not completely incongruous. It turns out it's not completely incongruous because I'm still in it. So it's kind of I need help, basically. I need help in order to marry these two things together in my life and in my practice. And I got it, which was really lovely because I was able to speak with people and have them respect what I was saying. And I think for me, I feel a lot of privilege there and a lot of gratitude. I had strong relationships with people already and was able to share my experience with them and have it heard because I had those strong relationships already. Right.
And I imagine too for someone who is coming into a Buddhist centre, a Buddhist organisation who is non-binary, genderqueer or non-gender conforming, that if they hadn't already had some relationship then that place is immediately unwelcoming, perhaps unsafe. And, you know, it would be work, you know, emotional labor for them to get that organisation up to speed, to understand.
Exactly.
You know, yeah. Exactly. So you're lucky to have had that. I'm supportive environment.
Very, very lucky and very, very grateful, and recognise that it's not everybody's experience to have that. And there's been, because of the kind of revolution of recognition of genders that's been happening, kind of, who knows how long it's been happening for, things are changing within my community, and multiple genders are being recognised, and a lot of work has gone into that. There are so many people who have done so much work for me to be able to be within the community that I'm in. And I'm so, so grateful that that's happened, you know, because it's just made my experience so much more welcoming than it could have been. And I'm not saying it's been easy. There's definitely been challenges, but the underlying wish from everybody for me to be okay and to feel like I belong within my community has been really strong, and that's powerful. And so one of the reasons why I kind of want to be part of Rainbodhi, and also one of the reasons why I want to be part of the community I'm part of, is so that I can keep that going. You know, it's like I'm going to be a non-gendered ordained being. That's powerful. And I want to use that to make it easier for other people to kind of follow in the path. You know, you can't walk a path that hasn't, you know, the Buddha did, but most of us can't walk a path that doesn't exist. You know?
And so you, in your own community in Sydney here, you've made it easier for people who are like you to kind of follow in a much easier way. Their path will be much smoother now that you've kind of pulled out some of the rocks and the weeds.
Yeah.
But what about other communities? Do you have some really practical advice that you could give to allies in other communities so that they can do very practical things that make non-gender conforming people welcome?
The very first thing you can do is not make any assumptions. So there's a lot of people who just kind of go, oh, I've read a book. I've watched a documentary. I understand now. And can then actually be quite inappropriate or violent in ways that they don't even understand that they're being. They're just being curious or helping, helping. So step
being
one,
an ally.
Yeah. I'm such a good ally.
So the difficult thing with those people, of course, is that because they perceive themselves as having knowledge and being a good person and trying, helping, they often react poorly when they're called out for something.
Yes.
Because there's a bit of cognitive dissonance which happens. Wait, I'm a good person. I'm cool with this.
I'm a good person.
I can't be bad.
Yeah.
I couldn't have said something wrong.
So the first thing I'm going to say is you're not bad. Definitely not bad. Very beautifully minded, and thank you so much. And my advice is ask more questions that are appropriate. So ask things like, what is your experience of gender? What are your pronouns? How can I support you to be in this environment? What do you need to feel comfortable here? We want you to feel comfortable here. How can we help you with that? Be curious and open-minded and respectful of people's boundaries. I've heard of horrible stories of people still to this day being asked about very private things that you wouldn't ask anybody else. So, you know, a good question to ask yourself before you ask a question is, would I ask this question of a straight cisgendered person? You know, would I ask this question of someone, you know, who isn't unusual in the way that I'm seeing them as to be, you know.
Like a curiosity. And I think that's the difficulty sometimes with people having curiosity, but not knowing the appropriate ways to find out. I often encourage people to do some research, not to always ask the queer or trans person to educate them.
Yes.
But then that's a bit of a double-edged sword too, because they read one thing or they think they've understood, and then of course they can stereotype.
Everybody's different.
Yeah, so it's tricky. But so that's good. So it's like, I guess what you're doing is suggesting that people should be open to firstly listening and learning, which are two different things. And understanding, which is, I guess, something that requires a combination of empathy and wisdom. And then what about like just the basic, like really practical things?
Yeah. So the basic and really practical things are, don't assume where someone is going to go to a bathroom, and if you can, have non-gendered bathrooms. Just have bathrooms. There's challenges there. So, for example, some cisgendered women would find it challenging to share a bathroom with cisgendered men, and vice versa. So there's a lot of needs out there that people have in terms of the practicalities. And if we can have as many options open as possible, I think that's the best way to go. It's finding ways to help people feel safe.
Right.
Finding ways to have people find spaces in which they can do what they need to do on a practical level, that works for them, so they don't have to make these uncomfortable choices. And we need to take on the responsibility of creating those spaces. So I'm not saying we as kind of genderqueer people, I'm saying we as people who have the ability to make those decisions, who have the ability to create those spaces. And it takes time. It's not, that's the other challenge, is that these things take time. It's like, for example, like an example is the retreat centre that I'm heading to this afternoon. It has a men's bathroom and a women's bathroom, and the bathroom, like the showers and the toilets are in the same space for both of those genders. So trying to find a way to meet the needs of a non-gendered person or a non-binary person is a matter of having a conversation with them and saying where you know, what's the best option, because we can't afford to build a new bathroom at the moment. We actually don't have the funds. So it's kind of, but then once we do have the funds, that's my dream, is that whole toilet block is just going to be leveled and something else is going to be put there.
I know some places will do things like have certain times of the day.
Yeah, that can work.
All genders can use any bathroom in between these hours.
Yeah.
Which I guess is a compromise. It means you have to kind of decide that's when you're going to have your shower.
Exactly. You've got to be very organised in that case. Yeah.
And other places I know would just get a sign which they kind of put on one of the bathrooms to indicate that it's for all genders.
Yeah.
That whole retreat.
Well, I mean, and it's even on a larger issue, is I'm going on a women's retreat, you know, because that's the option I have available to me.
Well, I guess maybe you'll have an entire bathroom to yourself this time then, maybe.
Unlikely, but yeah. But, you know, there's...
So tell me more about that, because it is true that many Buddhist spaces are incredibly binary, and often it's understood that particularly women really enjoy having a space that's free from cis males. And how is it for you having to negotiate, I guess, still in some ways conforming to some sort of gender expectations whilst being a non-gendered person?
I try, I don't... Ooh. So I'm just thinking about the words of your question. I don't ever feel that I need to conform to a gendered expectation within my Buddhist community. And that is because I've been very vocal. And because I've been able to be vocal. And most of the time that's really respected, especially with this kind of retreat that I'm just about to go on, because it's actually with all of my friends. So I'm going on a retreat with all of these people I know, and they know me, and they may need a little bit of a reminder and a prompt every now and then, because language is so strongly built into how we experience the world. And people find it difficult to remember to use they, them pronouns, or to not call the whole room of people sisters. And so there's a bit of a reminder there of kind of like, when you say that, you're removing me from this space. But I feel comfortable and confident within this context to be able to do that, because of the work that's happened before this point, to be able to go on this retreat and be able to be who I am. And there are still some times where I'll feel disconnected. That will happen. And I, on my good days of feeling very liberated by who I am and in the world, I'll just be able to meet that with care and recognition that people find these things difficult because it is confusing. If it's not your experience, trying to understand it is confusing. And so I can meet that with compassion and a gentle reminder and a gracious acceptance of sometimes the very long apology. And other days I just don't engage with it and feel more disconnected. Like other days I can just kind of go, I don't have it in me to deal with that right now. And then I just feel separate, and that can be painful.
And as I'm listening to you, I think I'm becoming aware of why you spoke in the bio that you wrote so strongly about community and connecting with community, because I guess communities can either accept or reject in gross and subtle ways.
Yeah.
How important is it then for you to be part of a genderqueer or a queer embracing community, such as Rainbodhi or any other affinity groups that you belong to?
Yeah. It for me, actually, Rainbodhi has been the space so far that within the queer world has felt most aligned with who I am in the world. Because there's that marrying of Buddhism and Dharma with ways of being, with identity and experience of identity, and recognition of the importance of both. You know, it's like sometimes within Buddhist communities you can get the, you're making a mistake, you're just tying yourself down to identity, you know, and within the kind of queer world you can get a lack of understanding about Dharma, which I'm trying to make my whole life. So there can be a real challenge there. And so it's being part of Rainbodhi brings those two things together, brings that recognition that actually, no, identity on the relative level is so important, because it allows us to feel connected and seen and understood and part of something powerful, and then keep moving. You know, we need to be seen and whole and understood and understand ourselves as fully as possible before we move into, you know, trying to move beyond that.
Mm. And often it's true in spiritual places, you're kind of asked to leave your other identity behind. And then in the queer scene, sometimes you're expected to leave your spiritual self behind. Exactly. It's like we have to make these choices of who we are. But I like that you spoke about being seen as whole, because it's true that, you know, queer, gender non-conforming people are spiritual people, and spiritual people can be queer and gender non-conforming.
Yeah. And
we shouldn't have to separate these things out.
No.
In some conversations I've had with trans and gender non-conforming people, we discover that these folks are often condemned for being attached to their identities or obsessed, but I think it's possible maybe to start shifting the conversation, that these people aren't just inept Buddhists, hopeless Buddhists who can't get it right, but actually experts about things like not self. What do you think of that?
Yes. Basically, I think that queer people have done a lot more exploration of their sense of identity within certain spheres, like within their sexuality sphere, within their gender sphere. You, just by coincidence of being slightly left of field, you know, you then have to understand. You have to explore. You have to get a sense of who you are and how that relates to who other people are and who other people think you are and who you think other people are. It's just this constant grappling with and thinking about and reflecting on and exploring self and other and the interrelation between the two. And we're not the status quo. You know, so the status quo doesn't have to question itself. The status quo is itself. And so we're constantly put in a position of having to question ourselves and our relation to this status quo. And I think the status quo needs to do a lot more work.
It's almost like we have an extra opportunity for liberation.
Oh, for sure.
Because we do interrogate these things, and we do.
I think so.
See the constructed nature of all of these things.
Yeah.
And it's true. I think that often our cisgendered or straight community don't have to do that, and it's a missed opportunity.
I think so. I definitely think it's a missed opportunity, and I love having those conversations.
Well, perhaps we can have a bigger conversation with more members of our community at another stage. And because I think that's a really healthy conversation to have, and that this is a important role that we can play in helping others understand identity. But I think that's probably enough for today.
It feels like a natural end. Yeah.
and also, I want to thank you for making visible on this Trans Day of Visibility a group of people represented by yourself.
Oh, yeah, okay. We're going to come back to
them. Not pigeonholing them, or
Bhante Akaliko representing only myself.
Understood. But representing an experience that might be shared by others in some ways, and for helping me listen and understand that difference. So I do thank you for that, and your time and your spirit today here, and all the work that you do for Rainbodhi and your other communities.
Thank you.
So thank you so much.
Lovely.
And I look forward to more conversations like this in different formats with other people too.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, then. Thanks, Claire. Have a great day. Enjoy your retreat.
Thanks so much.